Welcome back to Storytime with Scott Boss. This week we're going to read part 2 of the Graveyard Gazette, so please go listen to part 1 if you haven't yet. Also, leave some comments if you have any thoughts or anything that's come up during the story that you would like to talk about. Alright, part 2. On the ride home, Carrie took his turn down Garrett Road, keeping his eyes out for possums, and saw the Bremerton Memorial Gardens on his left. The gates were closed as they were the day before, and he saw a lump of plastic bag laying near them. He pulled over, up to the gates, and saw the newspaper just outside his door. Looking up at the lone building inside the graveyard, he saw vines growing up the sides, and cement darker at the bottom, showing its age. He climbed out of his car and picked up the paper, once again eyeing the building, wondering who would come and collect the paper anyways. Carrie didn't waste any time. He unfolded the paper, hoping it would still have the story about Coach Dodgman front and center, but found no such luck. He'd been replaced with a woman, beautiful by Carrie's account of the black and white newspaper photo. She had straight, dark hair to her shoulders and a knowing smile. She stood next to a piece of artwork nearly as tall as her, featuring what looked like a group of giant squids. The caption beneath it read, Angela Moretti, art teacher at Madison Middle, showcasing her painting, The Depths, among others, at a local art show. Then below that, in bold, teacher found dead in Lake Danner. Enough with this shit, Carrie dropped the paper like it was on fire. As usual, the news had little good to say about their decaying world. Carrie felt more and more that they weren't having to dig as hard anymore. Shit was happening, everywhere, especially in the U.S. Laura and him had talked about moving to Canada, but only casually, as anyone does when they want a change of scenery. Or, universal health care. Carrie was pretty certain it wasn't just bad timing, as Laura had put it, why they never got pregnant. If finances had been different, maybe he would have gone in and found out that it was another area of his life that he'd failed in. A bunch of swimmers with no torpedoes, or something to that effect. Laura blamed herself audibly, but he always wondered who she blamed deep down. She never went herself, but had suggested they go together once or twice. But Carrie hated doctors, and avoided them at all costs, especially if he couldn't see or feel something wrong with himself, like they'd find something just because he walked in the door. Those thoughts continued on his ride home. He didn't remember getting back in the car, driving to the closest gas station and grabbing a pack of Camels until the clerk knocked on the counter. "Sir," said the guy behind the counter, "that'll be $6.98. Carrie's eyes widened. "Sweet mother," he muttered under his breath. He knew there was a reason he'd quit beyond just the health benefits. He handed out his card and the clerk pointed to the pin pad. "You have a chip? Insert your chip." "Oh yeah," said Carrie. The clerk gave a concerned look that probably wasn't a show of sympathy for the price of cigarettes, but more that he was afraid Carrie was going to have a breakdown in his store. Carrie patted the pack on his palm as he walked out. Like riding a bike, he thought, removing the wrapping. He got into his car, searching his shirt pocket, and realized he didn't carry lighters anymore. Somewhere in his mind, he'd thought it would be easier to quit if he didn't have a way to light the cigarettes. There was some analogy he'd used back when about needing guns and ammo to kill somebody, but it wasn't a very good one. He sat staring at the gas station and realized the clerk was staring back at him. He couldn't tell, but he thought the guy had his hand on the phone, as if waiting to call the cops if Carrie got back out of the car. "Fuck it," said Carrie. He started his car. His craving would have to wait until he got home. Hopefully Laura hadn't taken all the matches when she'd left. Heaven knew she needed them, though, to go with all those goddamn candles. "Autumn fucking breeze," he said as he turned out onto the road, recalling a fight they'd had over just that scent. "I don't know if I'd get sick of this first or harvest pumpkin," she said as they stood in Bath and Body Works for what felt like 6 hours. She held Autumn Breeze in one hand, turning it over as if there was something else to see. "I'm gonna go smell some tobacco breeze outside," Carrie had said, garnering a frown of disapproval. He found a pack of kitchen matches in the junk drawer in the kitchen. Truth be told, he had about 4 junk drawers at that point, and it was number 3 that held what he needed. Carrie stepped into the porch of his Rambler. He still didn't want to smell the smoke inside in case he decided to quit again. The fall air was beginning to send cool waves through the trees, and it seemed that the last of summer had died off. It was going to be his first Thanksgiving alone since he could remember. He was sure he'd get an invite from his parents, but showing up to a family anything would be trying, considering it was Laura that did most of the talking at those things. The sun was hitting his windows when he got back to his bedroom. The cigarette had calmed him enough to consider some rest, but first he'd have to close his blackout curtains. Working third shift long enough, Carrie knew most of the tricks to convince his body when it was time for sleep. He removed his pants and shirt and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark room. The only light came from the clock on his nightstand that read 9:14. Carrie let out a big breath he'd been holding. It's noon somewhere. He hit the kitchen in his underwear and poured himself a double shot of wild turkey. It didn't go down smooth, but he didn't care. Soon he was back in bed, this time laying down, waiting for the buzz to send him sailing off. It was night. He was on the highway in his Taurus, going fast, but his headlights weren't on. It wasn't until a car whizzed past him that he realized he was on the wrong side of the highway. Their lights weren't on either, and they just avoided a collision. Carrie tried to swerve across to the other side, but the median was a cement wall as tall as his house. He continued, picking up speed as he rounded a curve. There was a cliff face on the left and the median on the right. More cars passed him, going 80 or 90 while he gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. He could feel the sweat on his palms, making the wheels slick as he swerved around an oncoming SUV. There was still no headlights to be seen. He'd been so lucky so far, nearly losing a side mirror in the last encounter. Then he saw them, a pair of headlights in the distance. He'd traveled down a hill and was on his way back up another. The rock face grew closer on his left until he was hugging the median on his right. They were heading straight for each other. The lights grew. He knew it would only be seconds, but he didn't try for the brake. He watched with wide eyes at the two glowing orbs, blinding him like a deer. The last moment he tucked his chin, closed his eyes, and braced for impact. A hard flinch awoke him in his bed. His palms were truly sweating, and his hands ached from clenching an imaginary steering wheel. The clock read 10:45, and despite the 12 hours between then and his shift at work, he knew he wouldn't be going back to sleep any time soon. Carrie shook his head, trying to get out the shiver that went up and down his body during the dream. He picked up his phone and saw a text from his sister Margie. It was a picture of the ocean. Most of her updates were views from the private airplane she worked on. He thought of her job as a high-class flight attendant. He wasn't sure if that was the official title, but he was sure the ticket prices were much more than United's. Hell, he said, I'm up anyway. He hit her contact in his phone and listened for the ringer. After a few, she picked up. There was wind in the background. This was almost always the case when they talked on the phone. KK, she said with a laugh. Marge, he said flatly. I know, you hate that name, she said. Can't say it's my favorite. So where are you? Looks like a body of water from the picture, but I hear they have those everywhere now. Not everywhere. We went over the Sahara yesterday. Seriously, I mean, I know it's a desert, but sweet Allah, the sand just goes on and on. Sweet Allah? When in Rome, KK. When in Africa? What client wanted to go to the desert? Egypt, silly. We were headed from Dakar. Gorgeous place. You should go sometime. That's where the picture's from. Right, said Carrie. Margie always gave him that line. Whether she meant it or not, it was like a slap in the face, like, I know you work in a factory and all, but you should totally take a trip to insert exotic place. Are you in the air now? He continued. No, I don't talk on the phone when I'm working. I'm headed to the hotel, then probably going to do a pyramid tour tomorrow. I figure why not? I'm here. I've got a free day. Sounds like fun. Send me pictures if you would. It'd be better than another window of the plane shot. I can do that. She was breathing heavy, as if she were walking fast and carrying luggage, which was very likely. So what are you up to? Shit, thought Carrie. Made a lot of smoke detectors last night. Oh, and on a related note, I started smoking again. Gonna be great for my health and bank account. Not much. Just woke up early and saw your text. Carrie could hear a change in the background noise, like she'd entered a room with a lot of people talking. You seeing anyone special? She asked. Sometimes I see the mailman, said Carrie. His legs look good in his little shorts. Shut up, said Margie with a laugh. No, I'm serious. With all those boxes he lifts. He was cut off when he heard her start a conversation. Hold on just a second, he heard her say, then clearer. Hey, Carrie, I gotta go. I'm at the hotel. I'll send you some pictures tomorrow. All right, said Carrie. Have fun. Bye. The line went dead before he could hit the end button, and he set his phone on the kitchen counter. He made his way out of the room as they talked, though he was still in his underwear. He noticed light reflecting outside, a signal that a car was passing, only the reflection stayed in place. Carrie walked to the blinds in the living room and peeked through just in time to see a mail lady, not the normal guy with the nice legs he usually saw. She was walking up his drive with a package in hand. Damn it, he thought. He hadn't ordered anything, but if it was one of those things that required a signature, he didn't want to miss it. The closest covering he could find was a fuzzy brown blanket on the couch, but if he wrapped that around himself, he'd look like a sickly old man. He ran back to his room and tugged on a pair of jeans as he heard the doorbell ring. There was a shirt sitting on top of his dresser that he'd worn a few days back. He didn't have the time to give it a smell check. He threw it on and ducked back out of the bedroom, banging his knee on the doorframe as he did. "Mother," he said as he hobbled the last 10 feet. He yanked on the door handle, but it shook in the frame as it caught against the deadbolt. He leaned into the door to get the old deadbolt to pop free as he turned it, then whipped the door open. A mid-sized box sat on his doorstep as the mail lady was turned half back, halfway down the driveway, watching him like he was a rabid raccoon going through the trash. "Hey," called Carrie. "Thanks." He looked down and noticed the tag on his shirt just below his chin. She nodded and continued to her truck, giving another glance back before she climbed in. Carrie closed the door and froze as he read the sender. Laura was all it said. No last name, no return address. He knew his ex-wife's handwriting, but what the fuck? She was acting as if he was some kind of stalker. He knew where she lived, about an hour or two away in Boone near her parents. Or did she live there? And what was this with the no last name? Was Mathis too terrible of a name to keep any longer? No way she was married already, was she? It hadn't been a full year yet. He shook himself out of staring at the box and brought it into the kitchen to cut open. There was some bubble wrapping around a soft object. As he unwrapped it, a note fell out. He picked it up with a hand shaking from a bit of anger, confusion, and a sprinkle of lack of sleep thrown in for good measure. It was short, one sentence, too damn short for someone like her. "I found this and thought you might want it. Laura." That's it, he thought? No "hope you're doing well," or "I'm doing well," even. Just "thought you might want it"? Carrie unwrapped his Bermerton High sweatshirt. Hope was already dead. He knew he would never get back with Laura. The nails were already in the coffin, but this was like kicking the coffin, he thought. It was an unusually cold night in August 22 years ago. Carrie was at a party for his friend Gil, a send-off before college. There was lots of underage drinking and dancing and general party things, guys jumping off the roof into the pool, couples making out in whatever empty room they could find. Laura was 16 at the time and had come as a friend of Gil's sister, Tiffany. Gil's parents were out of town, spending some of the money they'd saved for his college fund since Gil had gotten a full ride to NC State. As the night wore on and the sun went down, the temperatures dropped into the upper 50s. Carrie was enthralled by a pool diving competition, strictly as a spectator, but he could feel the shakes starting as Gary Wilson's last jump had sent a wave soaking the lower half of Carrie's Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt. The judges gave Gary 2 10s and 1 drawing of a penis on the makeshift cardboard scorecards. Carrie retrieved his Bermerton High sweatshirt out of the trunk of his Ford Escort and was about to pull it on as he jogged back towards the pool, not wanting to miss the next diver, when he saw a thin blonde girl standing by the pool chair. She was shivering as her friend Tiffany was getting chatted up by 2 guys from Carrie's science class. Carrie held out the sweatshirt under his arm and walked over to the other side of the girl, away from his classmates. "Getting kind of chilly," he said, casually in her direction. She nodded but didn't look at him, only focusing on the diver, teetering on the edge of the roof. Carrie sighed and held out the sweatshirt towards her. He waited for Danny Lopez to make a splash, 2 8s and another penis, before she looked at Carrie. "Take it," said Carrie. "I can see your lips are blue from over here." She hesitated for a few seconds before giving a shy smile and reaching out to take the sweatshirt. She gave it a look over before pulling it over her head. "Thanks." "No problem," said Carrie. "Sorry if it smells. It's been in the trunk of my car since last winter." "Ew," she said with a laugh. They watched the diving competition for another few rounds, mostly in silence, besides exchanging names. She was no longer Tiffany's friend. She was Laura Benoy. Carrie tried to mask his shivering, not wanting her to feel bad about taking his sweatshirt. He wasn't sure of the protocol at this point. There was no way he was going to ask for it back, and the couple beers he'd had earlier were hitting his bladder now. He excused himself. For one reason or another, He didn't see Laura or his sweatshirt again for 2 years. They started dating not long after she graduated high school. His sweater made a reappearance one day shortly after they became official. She admitted to him later, after some pressing, that she held on to the sweater because she had a crush on him ever since that day at Gil's party. Being 16 at the time, she knew her parents would freak if she was caught hanging out with an 18-year-old guy. The fact that he didn't ask for anything in return was what caught her interest. After spending most of the night watching guys pressing in on Tiffany, she thought it was just a matter of time before Carrie asked for a favor for lending her the sweatshirt. Only he hadn't, just stood there with her watching the divers. Carrie never told her her interest was elsewhere that evening, as he was trying to build up the courage to talk to Rhonda Jackson. Now he held the damn sweatshirt in his hands. Standing in the kitchen, he'd watched her dancing around when she cooked up something good or not so good so many times. He couldn't help but bring it to his face and try to catch one last trace of her scent, but all he got was some floral detergent. Carrie stuffed the sweatshirt back in the box and tossed it on the kitchen table. It caught the edge and flipped in the air, shooting the sweatshirt back out, sliding across the table to the floor and against the wall, barely missing the fish tank with a couple blue guppies. Sorry, guys, he said, going over and shaking some food that they attacked as soon as it hit the water. The rest of his day was a wash, watching reruns on TV, eating whatever shit he could find without having an actual meal at any point. When he saw the commercial for the antidepressant again, he shut off the TV, dropping the remote on the floor as his arm dangled off the edge of the couch. He couldn't bear their happy smiles, the dad lifting the kids in the air. It's not real anyway, he thought to himself. That dude probably goes back to a shitty apartment and does cocaine after the shoot. Carrie huffed at his own thought. It could be true for all he knew. The point was, the world was a dark and pointless place sometimes. In a few hours, Carrie would be back staring at smoke detectors until his sanity was at its end, with nothing to look forward to but breakfast at Harry's. His day had been full of good memories, of his young dating life turning into a puddle of mud in his brain. What was the point of any of it? What was the point of any of it? What if he had never met back up with Laura? What if Rhonda had given him the time of day instead of getting pregnant with that loser Todd from PE? It was all what ifs, though. You couldn't change anything. Shit just happened and you lived with it. He tapped his phone and saw it was just after 6. The sun would be going down soon, and the pre-work dread would begin. Hell, it already had begun. Carrie rolled off the couch. He'd heard getting out in nature was good for your mental health. At that point, anything would be better than laying around on the couch. He grabbed his keys and was out the door. That's the end of part 2. Next week, we'll start in on chapter 3.